Hello and welcome to the first BookBrunch Extra on Facebook Live. This morning I'm very excited to say it's publication day for a new book by Alexandra Shulman. I'll be introducing her in a moment properly, but before I just wanted to let you know the format. So we'll be chatting for about 20 minutes or so, and we'll be also taking questions, some of which I already have, but please do send more in through Facebook as we're chatting. So now, what a treat. This is the most fantastic book at this time. It sounds crazy to be talking about clothes when the world around us has gone slightly mad, but I do firmly believe we will need some kind of release. And who better to discuss clothes with and life with than the ex-editor of Vogue of 25 years, a powerhouse herself, Alexandra Shulman. Welcome to BookBrunch Extra.
Thanks so much, Ros. So great to be here.
Well, it's such a treat, and your book is out today, so happy publication day. So nice to have it in our hands, and we've actually, dare I admit it, already been selling it on our website. 2 books already, which is pretty exciting for a week.
Right.
I should just say, sorry for viewers, my name is Rosamund De La Hey, and I run an independent bookshop in the Scottish Borders. And yes, it's a great treat for us to be involved in this. So to the book itself. What I loved when I first opened it was your extensive list of your wardrobe. And this was an inspiration, am I right in saying, for a way into how you were going to tackle your book as a memoir. Could you tell us a bit about that process?
Sure. When I left Vogue, I knew that I wanted to write a book that would be about Vogue in some way, but not purely about Vogue. And I've got a terrible memory. So I couldn't write a sort of a Vogue memoir anyway, a straight memoir. So I was sort of struggling with what I was going to do. And one day, as a kind of diversion, I suppose, from worrying about what book I was going to write, I thought I'd have a sort through from the wardrobe. And as I was going through it, I thought I was interested in what clothes I had emotional reaction to and which ones I didn't care about. And so I started to count everything that was in there. And as I counted, I was sort of actually surprised by how many I had of the same thing, how many I had of some things and how few of others. And I made the list. And then when I was looking at the list, I thought, I think there's something in here about how we feel about our clothes. And everybody's got a wardrobe. We all have different wardrobes. But that might be a way of writing about my life in Vogue. It might be a kind of a route for doing it. So that was sort of what I bounced off in the beginning.
I think it's a lovely concept. It gives you, and also immediately makes the reader think about their own wardrobe. And I think we all have, pieces, a bit like music that somehow, resonate, or even just the sort of when you open a favorite book and sand falls out. It felt a little bit like that. There's a lovely nostalgic feel to the way you put it across. But equally, it takes you through large parts of your life. But it's very much a memoir, isn't it, rather than a biography. I really enjoyed that fact. It means, and I wondered if you'd thought at all when you were writing it how the reader would actually approach it. Are you expecting it to be read cover to cover, or is it a dip in, or what was your sense of that?
That's such a good question, and one I still don't really have the answer to, because the book is chapters about different clothes. So I start off with red shoes, which are my kind of red sandals when I was a child. They happened to be Start Right, those 2 little boy and girl that walked down the path, but then talks about what red shoes mean to women who wear them, or what I think about red shoes. And it goes on through different things like white shirts, bikinis, bras, many different things. And one of the things I was not sure about quite how to do was how to make it, what order to put those in, because everyone is not... There's no chronology in the book. It doesn't sort of begin with the beginning of my life, really, and end with the end of my life, because every chapter jumps forwards and backwards in time. So in the end, I just put them in an order that I thought sort of worked, a bit like a kind of putting together a magazine, sort of getting a mix of quicker ones, slower ones, shorter ones, longer ones, sort of did it that way. As far as how much the book was a memoir, it's actually come out much more of a memoir than I originally had intended it to be. I found myself delving into my own experiences and memories more than I had thought I would do at the beginning. So I think it's more kind of much more exposing than what I set off originally to write. You know, but books have a life of their own. You start writing and then they take hold.
Actually, on that, I did want to ask, because I think there's at one point I was reading or thinking about the idea of one of the most important parts of your job as editor of Vogue is, of course, presumably the meeting about the cover, the front cover. And I wondered how your experience had been of that world, that life, that process. And equally, I know you're a published author long before this book and a novelist, but how is it different for you? For example, choosing the cover, or were you involved in the choice of the cover for this book?
Well, the lovely thing about writing a book is that you do it on your own and you don't have to take into account everybody else's opinions, which you do when you're putting together a magazine, because obviously it's a team and it's a collaboration. When it came to the cover of this book, I had quite a strong view of what I thought I wanted the cover to be like. And I talked to Alison and Jonathan at my publishers about it. And actually, they did exactly what I suggested, which I hadn't really intended. And then I sort of panicked about, well, maybe it's not the right idea. Hang on, I hadn't expected you to actually do what I suggested. But they did write down to the fact that it's an indigo coloured cover, which I wanted, and a sort of black and white image. Covers in books are so important, as they are in magazines. And yes, in the magazine, I was very, very involved in what the cover would be. And in this book, I've been absolutely, involved in it. And I'm excited by it.
Well, it's a beautiful job, I think. Yeah, I mean, as an ex-publisher myself, I totally appreciate its sort of production value and sort of quality. It feels very sort of tactile and beautiful, which always helps, particularly these days. Now, so I wanted to take you back a little bit to the beginnings of your time at Vogue, or even just before then, because you have in your chapter on Suits, you talk a bit about that almost transformation. But I was interested that it felt as though, although it was a contrasting role, and there was a lot in the media at the time about that perhaps it was a surprise appointment, that you weren't necessarily from a fashion background. And you do talk about that your wardrobe in relation to that. And I love the bit about your budget being £4,000 a year. But it was more, you never mentioned, I don't think, the expression imposter syndrome. And I love the fact that you didn't. But I'm also very impressed, because it is such a problem, I think, with women taking on big jobs. Do you mind if we just sort of examine that a little bit and tell me your thoughts?
Well, I think at the time that I took on Vogue, the phrase imposter syndrome didn't exist. It wasn't something that people thought about or discussed, so if I had any feelings that there were sort of imposter syndrome types, I wasn't really aware of it. I mean, I did feel that maybe it wasn't actually me that was doing this. It was a bit of a kind of Atavar experience. But as time goes by, you begin to realise that it is you, and it's quite a short-lived thing. I think imposter syndrome is something that actually isn't just women. A lot of it's written about in connection with women, but I think men have just the same feeling of having to put on a display of something that maybe isn't necessarily the thing that they feel they really are. And sort of, do they deserve to be there? But I guess I didn't really ever feel that. I never felt, did I deserve to have that job? I mean, I always felt that I could do the job. I just might do it a different way to what other people would do it. And a lot of fuss was made about me not being a sort of fashion person when I got Vogue. But the truth is that I'd spent practically all my working life in upmarket glossy magazines. I'd edited GQ for 2 years before that. I'd worked on Vogue for 2 years before that. So it wasn't like, this strange kind of spaceman coming into Vogue. It was territory that I did know. It's just I didn't really work within fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm right in saying that you also had previously started off in the music world and had a slightly different experience there, but a good learning one in a sense. I love the fact that you talk about learning through being fired. I think it's so true.
Yeah, so I got fired twice for my jobs in the music industry, and in the chapter about white shoes, it's actually one of my favourite bits where I write about the first pair of white shoes I remember buying as being part of an outfit, which was a kind of compensation present for having been fired from my job at Arista Records. And I write that I always thought that I was fired because I'd slept with the boyfriend of my boss's best girlfriend. And I write that, well, you learn. I learned three things. I learned don't do that. I learned that actually if you get fired, something better often happens afterwards, which was that I left the job and I got another job. And I can't remember what the third thing I learned was. But the white shoes triggered that kind of thought process.
Absolutely. So on a more general kind of question about the book, it's so diverse in where you take yourself in each chapter, which is very enjoyable. So a mixture of the very personal and equally sort of fashion history, cultural history, music history. How much research did you actually do for it? Or was it very organic or was it deliberate?
I did quite a lot of research for the book. I spent a lot of time in the museum, the Victoria and Albert have a wonderful library that actually anybody can use. So I spent a lot of time there. They've got a great fashion resource. And I also spent a lot of time in the London Library, which I'm a vice president of, and which has this incredible collection of books. And so I would go to both of those quite a lot, specifically to do the research. And I was lucky that actually over there, you can't see it, but there's a whole wall of fashion books that I accrued from my time at Vogue, and they came in incredibly useful. But I sort of wanted it to have a greater depth than just me talking about my life and my own feelings about clothes. I wanted it to actually, I found some things completely fascinating, that I discovered about, the roots of the trench coat, or
yes, I enjoyed that.
And I love the beanie. I write about the beanie being starting its life as a balaclava, and then now balaclavas are such a kind of sinister idea that somehow they're also part of balaclavas are disguise, which is also what actually beanie hats are used by celebrities for. And I love that kind of segue that you can get.
Absolutely. It must have been quite tricky actually to know where to stop, how to draw the line. Was that something that you worked with an editor on, or did it feel quite natural when you sort of did the last full stop?
Do you mean did it feel natural at the end of the book or at the end of the chapters?
I mean the whole sort of concept. So because obviously it's a big wardrobe, there's a lot of different items you can examine. But with jumping off, there's so many different jumping off points. Was it difficult to then be disciplined and
no.
It feels wonderfully shaped?
No, I'm somebody that finds it hard to write long, not short. It's a famous story about me that, I came back from a school exam to get into my next school, and my parents asked me how it had gone. I said, oh, well, I did the essay really well. And they said, oh, how long was it? And I said 8 lines, and everyone's faces fell. And I feel that's like, for me, it's always hard to write more. So I really, I wrote what I wanted, and that was all there was there. I couldn't have written much more.
That seems like it speaks very much to your being at heart a journalist rather than a fashionista in a sense. Would that be right? Would you think that's fair? That your soul is more of a journalist than anything?
Well, certainly my experience is more as a journalist, and I've always expressed myself through the written word. I've never styled a shoot in my life, but one of the fantastic things about Vogue was that I was able to work with photographers and wonderful fashion editors, and it was a huge treat and privilege really to be able to work putting together fashion imagery, which of course pictures can say just as much as words. The one thing I did learn though is that when someone writes an article and they hand it to you and it's not quite what you want, you can change it. You can change the words very easily, or they can. Somebody gives you a fashion shoot and it's not quite what you want, you're stuck with it. You can't just change it.
It's very expensive.
It's very expensive and complicated, yeah.
So I have to ask, because particularly hearing you talk with such passion for your world, your subject, the decision to leave must have been a difficult one. But the way you write about it in the book, in your dressing gown chapter, it doesn't sound difficult. It feels quite almost natural. Could you sort of maybe expand a little on it?
So I'd been there for 25 years, and we'd had a wonderful centenary year in 2016. And I had no intention of leaving, actually, at the end of all those celebrations. We'd rented a flat in Aldborough in Suffolk, and partially in order that we could go somewhere on the weekends, that, while I was doing my job and everything. But I had been thinking for years and years and years about when I was going to leave. And so suddenly, one day, I did just wake up and think, actually, I think you can leave now. It was a strange kind of Damascus moment. I'd always thought about leaving with a sort of trepidation and uncertainty and not knowing what I would do next. But that morning, I woke up and I realized that there was this it was a bit like a sort of, a shining path ahead of me. And I thought, actually, this is crazy. This is opportunity. This is a future. And you should grab it and not be frightened. And it literally was a kind of a flip from one evening to the next morning. So I was very lucky.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, that's an amazing, thing to have happened, because otherwise most people would assume it would be very traumatic to have the kind of the sense of what next, end of an era. It's so daunting as a thought, is it not? Yes. But I think maybe that's a good point to perhaps offer the opportunity for the other questions to come in. So I'm going to go to a couple of questions that we've received in advance, and we'll be taking questions as they come through on Facebook as well. First question is from Jane. If you could choose one item of clothing to represent your life, what might it be?
I think that it's probably white shoes. It's an odd choice, but I've always loved white shoes. And when I was at Vogue, they became something of a sort of trademark for me. And I was very lucky. I had some beautiful shoes that Manolo Blahnik made. They're sort of white court shoes with a 90mm heel, which isn't too high and isn't too low. And I think the thing about white shoes, which is why I feel they're relevant to my life, is that they're very privileged in a way. They're very special, and they're rather kind of glittering. And I feel that that's sort of what my working life has been in part, and they always make me feel good. I can't have enough white shoes.
Fantastic. I'm very jealous. I've never managed to wear them.
You must now.
I will try now. Okay, I'm going to take one from Facebook now. So Carol Watson has asked, Can you please give me one piece of advice for anyone wanting to break into fashion journalism?
Yes, I always say read the best fashion journalists, because I'm amazed by how many people who wanted to break into fashion journalism never read any fashion journalism. And I would say, for instance, Lisa Armstrong of The Telegraph is brilliant. Anna Murphy is very good on The Times. Jess Cartland-Morley is very good on The Guardian. We have very, very good fashion journalists. And I think it's also worth reading sort of from some of the old collections of fashion journalism as well, because fashion journalism is like any journalism. You've got to tell a story. It's not just about plugging a piece of clothing.
Absolutely. Okay, another one from Facebook. So Nadia Dunhill asks, did working on Vogue redefine your idea of what is well-dressed in fashion personally and professionally?
I think working on Vogue may expose me to a lot of people who were very well dressed in fashion, and certainly I was surrounded by people who regularly, were immaculate in their style and, enviably so. I don't know that it very much changed how I felt about what was well dressed in general. And I think being well dressed actually it's a very individual thing. There isn't a kind of template for what makes you well dressed and what doesn't make you well dressed. I certainly think that having a sense of individuality and kind of confidence in your clothes is hugely helpful.
Fantastic. And okay, so I've got another one here already asked from Anne-Marie. Hi, Alexandra. Huge congratulations on the book. I was wondering, was there a particular eureka moment when you went, okay, it's time to resign? Oh, don't know why I'm asking this one. I've already asked you that question.
Yeah, I think we've answered that one. There was a eureka moment.
Terrific achievement. I'll move on. Now, okay, question from Maria. How are you relying on fashion in these uncertain times?
Well, they are uncertain times, aren't they? And who would have known that we would be sitting here doing this? I think clothes are really important to me personally in these times. I mean, I find that if I don't make an effort and think about what I'm going to wear, I feel much more kind of trapped in this situation than if I do try and sort of, when I say get dressed for dinner, I don't mean that we're putting on smoking jacket, but I think it's quite nice to get changed at the end of the day and put on something new to have in the evening. Like everyone, I spend a certain amount of time in sort of T-shirts and pajamas and dressing gowns, but I really sort of, if it gets past a certain hour and I haven't got myself up and properly dressed, I really give myself a kick, because I just think it's really makes a difference to the way I feel about myself. That's not necessarily true of everybody.
And sticking with the general subject of what we're all living through, a question from Michelle. Who on the high street is successfully adapting to the impact of COVID-19, and how do you think it will shape the fashion industry for the future? Quite a big question there.
Well, the high street, obviously, in terms of bricks and mortar, is closed and is having a nightmarish time. And we all have to, as soon as we can, get up and go shopping again, I think. Are very, very pleased by how many people in the fashion industry are actually helping in terms of making equipment. And I think one of the things that we're all seeing is that we all really like to hear about companies that are behaving well and that are trying to help in that way. It's very hard to know what we're going to see when we come out the other end.
Yes, I agree. Okay, I'll take another one from Facebook here. From Australia, Precious Fawcett is asking, from your personal fashion literature library, what books would you really recommend other than your own?
That's quite a difficult one. I loved reading a book which is called The Secret Life of Colour which I thought was an excellent book. It's not actually about fashion per se, but it's about what colours mean. And I found that very inspiring when I was writing this book. There are a series called Vogue on different designer books. They're little books which are excellent kind of mini biographies of how designers have appeared in the magazine over the years. And I think they're wonderful, particularly as a collection, actually. They're a really nice gift to somebody, give somebody sort of 3 or 4 of them. But honestly, so many, it's really hard to pick out.
Okay, so another one from Facebook. Harriet Hobbs has asked, what are your interests other than fashion?
I've got so many interests, and at the moment more so than ever, because I've added kind of knitting and jigsaw puzzles and things like that to them. But seriously, I love reading. I read a lot of fiction, normally women, I think, writers, and a lot of American fiction in particular. I like tennis, and I can't wait to get back out on the tennis court. I like cooking, which I might like a bit less after this is finished, because I'm not used to having to cook every night. But actually, it's interesting that since we've got time, in a way, you can experiment a bit with cooking in a different way to what I normally do. And I just love chatting to friends and family. I mean, I'm a hugely social person, and a lot of my time that's not working is spent seeing people. So again, I'm really looking forward to that coming up. Good gossip.
Aren't we all? Absolutely. So another question from the pre-invited ones. A question from Michelle in Northumberland. Hi, Alexandra. Would you please tell me if you have a favourite handbag and why is it your favourite? In your new book, you said you had 37. I'm the same. I rotate my bags according to occasion, season, and how I'm feeling that day.
Well, I have a sort of emotional attachment to an Anya Hindmarch handbag because forget how many years ago, she very kindly gave me a bag where she'd embossed a message from my son. He was very young at that point, on the inside in his handwriting. And so it's a kind of silver handwriting on the inside. And, I loved that bag. And actually for years I put it away and just sort of kept it as a piece of kind of nostalgia. But when I left Vogue, when I was going through all those bags again, I found that bag up there and I've been carrying it around ever since. So I think that's probably currently my favourite bag, but I do have other favourite bags.
How lovely. What a special thing to have. A question from Facebook. Frederica Delugaro. This is a tricky one. Do you have a favourite designer, either newcomer or established?
Well, I don't have a favourite designer, but I do have designers that I do really admire. I mean, I have huge admiration for Miuccia Prada. I think what she's done at Prada is absolutely incredible. In terms of newer designers, I really love what Erdem does, Erdem Moriaglu, and I wore a lot of his clothes. Fantastic new British fashion designer. I also really admired Jonathan Anderson, who now designs for Loewe as well as his own brand, and Simone Rocha. I think it's fantastic that we in this country have so many talented designers, and I really hope that everyone's going to be able to get back on their feet, because this is going to be very difficult for fashion for a good many months.
Yes, absolutely. And a very relevant question from Anne. Do you have plans for another book? And if so, what's the theme? No pressure.
Well, oddly enough, since today is publication day, I feel like this is the first day that it's sort of the first day of the next book, as it were, because up until now, it's all been about clothes and other things that matter. And now I feel like, I've got to get cracking on and thinking about the next book. And in all honesty, no, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but as from today, I'm thinking about it.
Excellent. That's very good news. Now, where are we? Okay, question from Nadia. What defines a well-dressed woman in your eyes?
Well, I think earlier on I said that it's to do with, I think style is to do with kind of individuality and feeling confident in wearing what you want to wear. So a well-dressed woman can be all kinds of things. I mean, we all have personal preferences about what we like and what we don't like. And I think I like to feel that somebody hasn't just copied something. They're not a kind of template, that they've mixed up their clothes a bit. I love people who wear vintage clothes. I love people who are good at mixing the high street with designer. I think a sense of colours rather wonderful, and so I think just wearing black's a bit boring, but I write about that in the book as well. So I don't think there are rules.
Absolutely, and I love your bit about navy. Very interesting. I'm trying.
Yeah, I love navy.
Me too. So, question here from Charlotte. What is your best memory from your time at Vogue?
So many memories of Vogue, and it seems weird that actually it's nearly 3 years since I left. I think the centenary year was probably the one that was stuffed with memories, because it was so special. And I probably, my very best moment was the National Portrait Gallery had an exhibition called Vogue 100. And the opening night of that exhibition was absolutely extraordinary. I hadn't put together the exhibition. Obviously, I'd helped work on it. But to go in there and to see the National Portrait Gallery filled with images from this magazine, not all images that I had in any way been part of, but the whole history of it, and to be surrounded by people who were looking at them and admiring them and feeling that was something that I'd spent so much time sort of immersed in. I do remember leaving that and just feeling that was a really extraordinary and very moving moment.
Sounds spectacular. Question from Facebook. Leslie Covington has asked, if you were an item of clothing, what would you be and why?
Oh, Leslie Covington, you're one of my Instagram followers, I know. If I was an item of clothing, what would I be? I hope that I would be a really nice pink dress. I think pink dresses are just sort of, they make you feel happy, and I think that's what I would like to be. Whether I would actually be it, I'm not so sure. I might well be more like being a sort of an old navy sweater.
Now, I have to ask you about something. Sorry, I'm being selfish here and just asking a separate question I meant to ask you earlier. You talk a lot about fear of flying in the book. Is that something that you must have had ways of coping, because you must have been obliged to do a huge amount of flying in your time at Vogue. It sounds a pretty tough call when it's such an integral part of the job to have that sort of pulsating through you as you're approaching the shows each year. How did you cope?
Well, when I was offered the job, the first thought I had was, I can't accept it because I'm too scared of flying. And I knew that I had to fly in the job. And then I thought, well, I can't not accept it because I'm too scared of flying. I mean, that just isn't an option. So it's amazing what you can make yourself do if you really know you have to. And it was, my fear is better now. I went at one stage to a very good hypnotist who definitely has cut the anxiety, but that was only about 5 years ago when I got told I had to fly to Japan, and there was it was a 3-line whip, so there was no choice of not going. Up until then, really, tranquilizers, alcohol, praying to a higher being, gritting my teeth. Yeah, it was difficult. It was probably one of the most difficult things.
Yeah, very tough. Well, I suppose at least one of the very few positives of our current situation is there's no flying
Don't
involved.
have to fly, exactly.
Goodness me. So I think we have just about come to the end of our time. So it really is down to me to say a huge thank you to you, Alexandra, for just a lovely insight into this very special book. And speaking as a bookseller who is sort of enjoying the very few new books that are coming out, I am delighted your publication date wasn't moved, because I think, although it may sound crazy saying a book about clothes and life is sort of strange at this time, I think the opposite is true. I think we all need a distraction, a way to escape into somebody else's life and thoughts, and you've given us a very lovely way of doing that. So thank you very much for being the first Book Brunch Extra subject, and best of luck with publication going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ros. Thank you.